we have our next keynote speaker coming to the stage, who I am also very, very excited to have grace the Next Web Conference Vision stage. Coming to the stage is Alisa Cohn. Get ready for a presentation that has enthusiasm and super practical tools to help businesses overcome a very common challenge. Alisa Cohn is a executive coach and author of Startup to Grown Up, and a podcast by the same name. Also something that I need to look into because, man, I watch way too much Disney Plus in my own life. She is also a Broadway investor, a kettlebell-obsessed weightlifter, and if we're all very, very kind to her, she's a very, very amateur rapper. Without any further ado, please welcome to the stage, Alisa Cohn!
Thank you. Thank you. I don't mean to brag, but I am part of an elite category, which includes Serena Williams, Michael Jordan, Howard Schultz, and Lady Gaga. These 4 world-class players all have imposter syndrome, and so do I. Now, if you're not familiar with the term imposter syndrome, it's the feeling that you're going to be called out as a fraud, that everything you've accomplished before in life is because of luck, but your luck is about to run out. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands if you've experienced imposter syndrome. You're welcome, although some of you are raising your hands, and I see you. But honestly, I don't have to, because it turns out that 95% of high performers, CEOs, entrepreneurs, investors, ambitious professionals, the people sitting in your chairs right now have at some point experienced imposter syndrome. As an executive coach for 20 years, I have talked with hundreds of people across many, many companies like Google, Hitachi, Dell, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, and I've coached politicians, public figures, and sports stars. And in the sanctity of the coaching room, they share with me their trauma about their fears of being a fraud. Now, some people think that that's a bad thing and something to be avoided. And there are thousands of books and articles written about how to overcome your imposter syndrome forever. But my entire goal today is to get you to put yourself in harm's way and give yourself more imposter syndrome more often in order to let it drive you to higher performance. To embrace your inner imposter, which I call a gremlin. So how can I make that case? How can I make the case that you should give yourself more imposter syndrome more often to let it motivate you? Well, first let's talk about what it's like to be in the throes of self-doubt. If you're calm and comfortable all day, every day, I'm sorry to tell you that you are not aspiring to all that much. I regularly think of this wonderful quote by the writer William S. Burroughs. When you stop growing, you start dying. Well, I don't know about you, but I picked growing. So when imposter syndrome shows up, it's a signal that you have taken on a challenge which is worthy of you. It turns out that in your career trajectory, that kind of scary, painful growth is essential. When you start moving up in your career, you have a very steep learning curve. At some point, it flattens out, and you get to the mountaintop of mastery. Now, that feels comfortable, and that's great. But if you stay there without giving yourself a real stretch challenge, you move from the majestic mountaintop of mastery to the tragic trough of complacency. You get bored, and your performance declines. But it's not just your career success where you need to embrace your inner imposter. Research shows that the keys to a happy marriage are when both spouses feel like they have married out of their league. So fundamentally, when in a happy marriage, fundamentally both spouses feel like they're imposters. You secretly hope that your spouse will not find out that you are the lucky one. So if that were all there was to it, And the distinction, but I would just say that the difference between a fulfilled life and an unfulfilled life is your ability to embrace your inner gremlin and let it lead you to the life of your dreams. And if that were all there was to it, I would say, great, go out and take on bigger challenges than you think you can handle, challenges which are worthy of you. But then there's only one problem. Now you have a massive case of imposter syndrome. And it can be paralyzing. It can be paralyzing. I know firsthand the downside of too much imposter syndrome. I was a journalism major, and I worked in the nonprofit world before I applied to business school. Now, I got into business school, but I got in on one condition, the condition that I had to go to camp. This was not the kind of camp where you do canoeing and arts and crafts and archery. It was math camp, where I was steeped in calculus and statistics, which, is, by the way, is exactly as fun as it sounds. So after math camp and after business school, I was elated to get the call from the premier investment bank in the world. They wanted to interview me. I was like, oh, this is Mount Everest. I was so excited. I went to the interview, and I went up to the 40-something floor, and in the lobby, I saw these glass-walled conference rooms. And inside of those conference rooms were very serious people with perfect hair and achingly chic suits. Well, I was a little daunted, and as the day went on, I had interview after interview, and I met person after person, and my confidence began to falter. And it was a grueling day. But at the end of that day, nobody was more surprised than me to get the offer. But I was not walking on air. In fact, I was filled with dread, because I thought about the people I'd met that day and how smooth they were. And then I thought about me, a little girl from a small town who'd been in the nonprofit world, who had to go to math camp before I got to go to business school. I did not belong, so I turned down the offer. Now, don't cry for me, Argentina, because my life turned out just fine. But for weeks and months, I was haunted by that experience. And even to this day, I know it was my inner gremlin that called and turned the offer down. What I've learned from that experience, and the experience of 2 decades of talking to clients about their own experiences with imposter syndrome, is that a little imposter syndrome is motivating. Too much imposter syndrome is paralyzing. You have to learn how to dial it down when the pressure goes up. So today, I'm going to give you 3 super practical, very usable strategies that you can use to handle your own inner gremlin when it comes up when you're taking on the challenges in your life. So I really want you to think about this from the point of view of, what can I use in my life starting today that's going to really help me overcome my own challenges? The first strategy is to tune into your self-talk. The reason you have imposter syndrome is because you are telling yourself that you're an imposter. Elite athletes know that what you say to yourself matters. When you tell yourself negative things, your performance goes down. But when you catch yourself and you give some distance from those negative thoughts, your performance goes up. Now, this is not happy talk mantras like I'm good enough and I'm smart enough, but it is true that when you're able to articulate to yourself and tune into what you're saying, it loses its power over you. So an example of this is my client, Ken. He's the founder and CEO of a fast-growing startup. Ken called me in a panic one day. And so I went down to see him, and we had a long walk and talk. And he told me about what we came to call the iced coffee intervention. It seemed that a number of his longest employees had come to him and asked him out for an iced coffee. So they went down to the coffee shop, and right there in the coffee shop, they confronted him with all their issues. They said, employee morale is terrible. Nobody knows what's going on. And worst of all, everybody hates you, and they're all going to quit. Whew. Now that, of course, is a slap in the face to anybody. But Ken seemed frozen. So I asked him, what are you telling yourself? And he told me, after he tuned in for a little while, and then he told me 2 things. Number 1, I'm not a real CEO. If I were a real CEO, like Jeff Bezos, I would know how to handle this. And number 2, everybody's going to quit, and I'm going to be left in the conference room all by myself with my laptop. So once he was able to really tune in and give voice to his deepest fears, he began to get unhooked. When he could put his gremlin voices in perspective, he was able to get them out of the way. And then he could see this as an opportunity to grow, and that's what he did. He addressed his employees, he got a lot more accessible and collegial. He certainly got a lot more committed to his communication and was more clear and more consistent in the way he dealt with them. And he doubled down on celebrating success. 2 years later, his company was named one of the top places to work in New York City, and 1 year after that, he sold his company. So I guess Ken was a real CEO after all. Now, you can do this too. When the gremlin voices come up for us, we want to hide, we want to push them away. But don't do that. Don't push your gremlin voices away. Instead, tune in to what you're telling yourself. The more you can articulate it very specifically, the more you can unhook yourself, and that frees you up to take the action that you need to take. That's going to help you grow and overcome this challenge that is confronting you. The next strategy is to create a highlight reel. So what's a highlight reel? A highlight reel is your best of moments. Your moments from your past where you're most successful, where you were competent, especially when you overcame challenges. It shows you that it gives you evidence of your abilities and shows you that it's not just luck. So my client Martin was the partner in a venture capital firm. Now, I don't know if you know this, but venture capital is actually a lonely profession. You work by yourself, nobody gives you any feedback, and you don't even know if you're a good investor because it takes 10 years for your company to go IPO or to get acquired. So it can be a very difficult place to work, and for Martin, he did his work, he did his research, he made his investments, and mostly he felt overwhelmed by a massive case of imposter syndrome, which for Martin looked like his name being called out over the loudspeaker, telling him to go to the principal's office and to take his stuff with him. Now, that's not rational, but those are the fantasies in our minds that our gremlin voices give us. So I asked him to put together a highlight reel, examples, scenarios from his past where he was most successful. Even though Martin thought that was stupid, which I am used to as a coach, even though to humor me, he did that. So he thought about a time in his life where, when he was an undergrad, he talked himself off the wait list of his undergrad college, and even though he always felt out of place there, he graduated with honors. He remembered that in the first year of his firm, when he was in with his firm, he sourced the most deals out of everybody in the whole firm. And I reminded him that just a few months ago, the firm was in danger of losing a deal, and it was his strategy and his personal call to the CEO that helped save it. So he wrote all those down, and again, to humor me, he agreed to read them every day. The next time I saw Martin, he was beaming. He told me he read his highlight reel every day, and he even added to it. And he told me that it gave him a feeling of such great energy that he was able to then go tackle something difficult, like a difficult conversation, or like to do some intricate research. And he began to see that he could handle things. That even if he had challenges, and that also he would always bite off more than he could chew, but even so, he would be able to figure it out. And he really realized that he had evidence of his past successes. That is the magic of a highlight reel. So you can do this too. When you're confronted with your difficult voices, or even every day you can do this, create in advance a highlight reel. The moments from your past where you overcame challenges and you had your best successes. They can be work-related, they can be not work-related. They can be big, they can be small. It doesn't matter, don't overthink it, but write them down, like literally write them down, and then read them every day. And that is going to remind you of your greatness and your abilities, and it's going to show you that it's not just luck that is helping you. Sometimes you have times when your gremlin voices get to you, and it's only in certain circumstances. And that was true for my client, Annie. Annie was the founder of an organization that helped advocate for affordable housing. Annie was a great leader. She had great relationships, she'd gotten great outcomes, and she had raised a ton of money. Annie was a powerhouse leader inside of a very petite body. There was only one group that Annie had trouble with. She had to deal with the construction guys a lot, and they were mostly a group of big burly men, and that was always an issue for her. It made her feel small. The construction guys would talk a lot of jargon that she didn't fully understand, and they would ignore her and talk among themselves, and overall make her feel like a bully getting beat up, like a little girl getting beat up by a bully on the playground. So I asked her, is there someone that you can channel, an avatar, a role model, someone who can give you a boost of confidence when you're going into your story of feeling like a fraud? She answered me immediately. Anthony Bourdain, the bad boy celebrity chef and the star of the TV show Parts Unknown. I picture him hacking his way through the jungle and coming out with a machete in his teeth, she told me. Honestly, I was not expecting that from someone like Annie, but God bless. So I asked her if she could really work on channeling Anthony Bourdain when she needed a little extra moxie. She tried, she failed, she tried, she failed over and over. I got her a little charm bracelet, and I found a little machete charm. You can find literally anything on Etsy, it turns out. And I gave it to her, and she began to wear it on her wrist. One day, she was facilitating a meeting between her team and the contractors, the construction guys, and the meeting got contentious. Now, most often, I am not in the room to see my clients in action. But in this case, I happened to be there observing the meeting. One of the guys stood up and started berating her. So I got to see Annie stand up, like physically stand up. I had never seen her so big. She told the guy to calm down and to sit down, which he did, miraculously. And she addressed his concerns and resolved the meeting to a way that worked. That was a good outcome for everybody. After everybody left, we high-fived, and she jangled her machete from her wrist. So you can do this too. Think of a role model. Think of an avatar, someone that you'd like to channel in times that would act the way you would want to act when your gremlin voices get to be too much for you. It can be anyone. It doesn't have to be someone you know. It can be a celebrity, a public figure. It can be living or dead. It can be not even doesn't have to be real. It could be a superhero. More than one of my clients have picked her a superhero. Just also get a picture or an object to remind you that you're not doing imposter syndrome right now. You're doing your avatar now. And overall, that will help you act the way you'd want to act in those high-stakes moments. Honestly, I see imposter syndrome as an invitation. It is a signal that you're on the threshold of a great challenge and that you're aspiring to more in your work and in your life. Your gremlin voices are going to tell you to stop, but I'm going to invite you to keep going. And I'm going to invite you to use these tools starting today to help you navigate yourself to the mountaintop that's waiting for you on the other side. Thank you.